What books do women feel are red flags when they are starting to date and get to know a man? And today we are going to review a list compiled by women of the red flag books. And we have all been there before on a first date, sitting across from a woman, and she says, "I love to read. I read all the time." And we're like, "Oh my God, thank you." And then the second date rolls around and we say, "Hey, I know you said reading, so I thought I would give you my favorite book to read. And you don't have to read it, don't worry. But don't let the size intimidate you." But this is a postmodernist metafictional exploration of acid addiction and how familial trauma affects all men. And I got 4 or 5 copies at home, and I've got an end note in here for you. So you could just have this. You don't need to read it, though. All of us have been there before, but you know when you're a real lit bro, when the woman sitting across from you on the first date says, "I haven't read a book since high school. In ninth grade, we read Animal Farm, and that was boring." And so you wait. But then on the third or the fourth date, you say, I think it would be fun to get to know each other a little bit deeper. And every single week, I think we should read part of this book together and talk about it. It's called Gravity's Rainbow. And I know you said you weren't into reading books, but I assume you're into World War II. And this book has no narrative, no plot, but it's really good. Anyway, thank the Lord I'm done with that and have married someone who is into real literature. But let us start to review this list. And the first one up is J.D. Salinger's The Catcher in the Rye. And obviously, Holden has his own problems, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the reason that I actually agreed that this one may be a red flag is that most of us, when we were younger in high school, middle school, whenever, read The Catcher in the Rye. But many people, and this may surprise you, after high school, never read a book again or never even think about a book again. And so while in conversation with maybe a woman who reads or something like that, a man has to think of something. He doesn't want to feel dumb. And so he reverts back to that one story that maybe touched him a little bit, which was The Catcher in the Rye. And it's funny that it's impacted a lot of men because it's about this loss of innocence, which is kind of one of the more favorite pastimes of men, sitting outside, taking a walk, brooding over the loss of innocence. How did I get here? Where did it all go? Where did my time go? I was just once a little boy playing with my ships. And so I would agree that if someone is mentioning this as their book or like a book they really like, if you go down the list and you like Catcher in the Rye, whatever. But once again, first impressions matter. If you are dating someone or getting to know someone and they want to know what you are into, then of course they are going to judge you on what they are going to say. If I was on a date with a woman and she said, Mein Kampf by Hitler is my favorite book, that's the biggest red flag. Like, oh shit, I got to get out of here. And this gets such a big stigma as I just mentioned, that people who have PhDs are less likely to commit a crime than someone who didn't graduate from high school. I mean, I give my stamp of approval on this one if the person has no other books on their list. So the next book on the list is Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. And this is such a silly pick because Nabokov is one of the best authors of all time, wasn't a pedophile, didn't promote pedophilia. And when you actually hear what he says to men about how men should treat their wife and act in the world and who they should be, I mean, he is one of the more esteemable and respectable authors out there for men to idolize or look up to. But this one also has to be looked at in context. So I am a high school English teacher, and back when I lived in Las Vegas, there was this teacher at the school I was at, and he was like 22 years old, just had graduated from college, and he was very good looking, charming. He ran fun classes, and everybody loved him. All the girls thought he was really hot. And at the start, and he came up to me one time, and he was like, "Ian, I have this problem. Like, what should I do?" Because at the start of his classes for 10 minutes, he would let the kids read whatever book they wanted to. And every couple of weeks, he would sit down and have a conference, with the kids about what book they were reading. Like, "Hey, what's this about? Are you enjoying it?" Yada, yada, yada. And he had this female student who was reading Lolita, and he didn't think much of it. Like, okay, this is a very popular book, especially with girls in today's era. Like, it's a big book that's promoted on TikTok all the time, book talk. And so whatever. And he moves on. But then the next book that she was reading was more of a fan fiction, weird book about a teacher having a male teacher having a relationship with a female student. And that's what he was asking me, like, is this weird? And I was like, yes, this is weird. You need to go have a meeting with her and the administration immediately. Like, you gotta get this taken care of. Like, this is moving into sketchy territory. And so that is an instance, technically in reverse, where Lolita could obviously be a red flag. If a guy says my favorite book is Lolita, that's going to be a judgment call. But from what I've known, and I've talked to a lot of people who are into reading and books, I've known a lot more women that say that that's their favorite book than men. And once again, another way to gauge this is, are they a fan of Nabokov? Do they want to talk about Pale Fire or some of his essays? What do they know about his life? And then ask yourself, like, am I a 20-year-old woman dating a 50-year-old man? Like, and do I, certain questions could come up, but I think I wouldn't put this in a red flag category unless someone is like egregiously using it. Of course, we're going to have to talk about Ernest Hemingway and The Sun Also Rises. And what's funny about Hemingway is that I am I would say a Hemingway scholar. I've been to multiple Hemingway conferences. I've written papers on him, presented those papers at those conferences. And I have come to realize and write about Hemingway's deep traumas. Hemingway was dressed up as a female in the early 1900s by his mother without his consent. His mother called him Ernie and put him in dresses. And imagine the bullying that happened to him in, the middle of a farm town in the Midwest. And so that was a very deep psychological wound for him. And he wasn't allowed to enter World War I because he had some weird medical issue. That really wasn't that big of a deal. And that also traumatized his masculinity. He felt like he had missed out on all of his friends, went to the war. And so he really projected hypermasculinity and his minimalist style out into the world. And even though I'm a huge fan of Hemingway, a lot of men who are reading Hemingway don't really see that. And they like him because his characters are short and simple and the classic man. And this could be a red flag because as a woman or as a man, you don't want to have to be doing guesswork with what the person you are dating is feeling. You don't want to learn 6 months into the relationship that they are religious or have these resentments about you or certain types of people or these types of things. Like, you want someone who's emotionally open. And so someone who is really into Ernest Hemingway and isn't taking that angle seems to maybe be glorifying him and glorifying his works, which is fine. Totally cool. I'm in that category. But you should maybe test why they like Hemingway and also how open they are to talk to you, because the most toxic men in the world are the ones that shell everything up. But I don't know if I would throw this on my red flag category either, because liking Hemingway is perfectly fine. And from what I've seen from meeting many people who like him, to read a classic author, from the modernist period requires a certain intellectual level and openness. Maybe if we're talking about The Old Man and the Sea or something, but if they are getting through The Sun Also Rises, I don't think anymore, at least, that's a red flag. Next on our list is Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. And this one is really funny because it's written by a female, but championed by a lot of male libertarians and conservatives. And I could see why this book has been problematic for a lot of people, because this isn't the old world. Dad can't be a Republican and mom can't be a liberal as much anymore, because we've become so politically polarized that I have countless friends who add to the complexity and hardships of their relationship because they are arguing politics with their spouse all the time. But I think there is a lack of nuance in terms of marking this book as a red flag, because yes, conservative and libertarian men like this book more so than any other category. And that category of men also believes in the Christian God more so than any other category. And obviously, if you are in certain denominations of Christianity, you are going to have an expectation of how your wife should act and present herself to the world, which can create a lot of problems. But this all kind of falls down because Ayn Rand was an anarchist / libertarian, and she didn't believe in God. She was taking drugs all the time. And if you read Atlas Shrugged, it really isn't promoting women to be homemakers or held down or anything like that. It's promoting the creative freedom of individuals in the world to kind of think and do business as they wish. And I would say that anyone in 2024 that is super into politics and still believes in the simulacra of it all, that is the real red flag. Because if they can get warped into the whole marketing show of politics, what else can they be manipulated into? And that's why I was so happy when I talked to my wife, as we were getting to know each other, and she was like able to laugh at both liberals and conservatives. And so I would say that this is a red flag if the person that you are dating is also kind of this Christian conservative and you don't want to fit into that lifestyle, because that's what they want. And so that's okay. There are plenty of women who are happy to live a Christian or conservative lifestyle. But if that's not you, then I wouldn't call that a red flag. That's just, you just need to probe and see what they want out of a wife or a partner. And I think you're seeing a theme here that I've known plenty of women who don't ask questions of their boyfriend, sometimes for years. Like, they have no idea who this person is. They have this kind of this image that they've created and a projection of their soul image. And the same with men too. And the faster you kind of break through all that, the faster you can see your partner for who they are and see if you actually want to be with them or not for the long haul. So next on our list, coming back to the start of the video, is Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. And this is one of the most unfinished books of all time. And it's predominantly read by men, especially younger men. And so the reason that men love this book is that it really speaks volumes to some of the trauma and mindset that they've experienced and puts words to it. And the biggest red flag I could see with this book is that it has 200 pages of endnotes and is a very complex and hard book to get into. A red flag that you could also note is that outside of the big book in Alcoholics Anonymous, Infinite Jest is always recommended by other addicts for people that they sponsor or are in meetings with to read. And dating an addict or even a former addict, can be very challenging and hard, and obviously comes with a whole host of red flags with that. I mean, you could also say that a lot of this book has to do with drug use also. I mean, that's some of the better parts, in my opinion, of Infinite Jest. And people who have used psychedelic drugs may view people who haven't had the same revelations as them as lesser or ignorant. And this kind of comes to this problem that both men and women experience, that I've known plenty of women who view men as fixer-uppers, right? They're like, oh, this guy's a bad boy and he's got these problems, but he has a good heart. He laughs with me. He likes this and that, and he'll figure it out over the couple of years. And as I'm sure many of you have experienced, that almost is never the case. But I also know a bunch of men who are more intellectual or think they understand all the stuff about the universe. They've done acid and all this stuff. And then they see a woman who maybe they think has a good personality and is very pretty. And they're like, okay, well, she's not exactly good enough for me, but if she did acid and read these books and all this stuff, then we would be a perfect couple. But you're asking someone to become something that they're not and maybe don't want to be. And if they do that, are they doing that for themselves or are they doing that for you? And there is a social component to personal development, and it's probably the strongest one, like finding people to help push you. But if they're not already heading in that direction, then it can be very traumatic. And I would question the type of person that would want to push, to fix someone up or to push someone into something that they're not really, following or aligned with in their heart. This book also is kind of one of the first big books that a lot of men read. Like, it's the big, they get into reading and they hear like, oh, you got to read Infinite Jest. And then they get through it and they're really excited about it. So I think there's just a bit of overexcitement for men. But in general, I would say that if a man has understood this book and has read it, then that should be like a green flag, because they've contemplated their own familial trauma, maybe some addictions they have. And I always say that Infinite Jest can change your life. It can really transform your soul by the time you're done with it. And that's very rare for a book to do. And so I think maybe a lot of this list, from what I'm seeing, I mean, obviously this list is a bunch of polemics and BS, but these are real people saying this stuff. Next on the list is Jordan Benzo Peterson. And I always joke around when I talk about Jordan Benzo Peterson, because what people get so mad, why are you making fun of him being an addict and on benzos? Because I'm like, that's the best marketing angle ever. He could say that I out-debated all those people and all those shows and did all this stuff, and I was just popping Xanax all day. I was just high out of my mind, and I was a killer out there. I know that doesn't work well with his professional image and everything, but Jordan Peterson is not a dumb individual. Jordan Peterson is a Jungian psychologist, understands many different aspects of the humanities, the arts, literature, philosophy, and he has put himself in more of a sketchy zone for criticism because he has become kind of a political pundit who comments on a wide variety of issues and kind of keeps up with the recent news. And so a lot of people see him as a red flag because he represents a lot of right-wing values. And so if you're on the left, like, oh my God. But I would say if a guy you are dating is into Jordan Peterson and has absorbed the main message of his work, then they are going to be a better person than before reading him. I've read all 3 of Jordan Peterson's books, watched a lot of his lectures online. I'm really into psychoanalysis and Jungian psychology. And even though I have a load of criticisms of him, and I'm very much into personal development, like a lot of the main stuff that he talks about, I had accomplished in my life over a decade ago in terms of getting it together. There were still things that he has said and shown me that I think about, and I have integrated in a positive way in my life. And then when I compare that to maybe some of the negative things or perceived negative things that Jordan Peterson could have integrated into me, it's such a big disparity. And so I guess you could say if they are into the religious stuff, the psychological stuff that Jordan Peterson is into, I would say that's positive because Jordan Peterson doesn't call himself a Christian. He's not a Christian, but he is talking about the Bible and canonical stories and about psychology. And that's great. And it's good for men and women. But, if you disagree with the political stuff, as I was talking about earlier, there's probably no need to kind of get into a relationship like that right now. I knew a woman, well, I actually witnessed a fight, I should say. While at university, had started hanging out with these 2 friends who knew each other since high school. And one of the guys had just broken up with his girlfriend that he'd been dating since high school because she hated Jordan Peterson and he loved him. He would sit and play it on the TV at their house and she'd turn that shit off. And she'd get super angry and caused a lot of problems. And eventually they broke up. But my friend and I knew his girlfriend, and I knew the girlfriend because she was in our program at university. And so one time we were all getting lunch together and we're waiting for him and he comes up and he's red in the face and he's like, what the F? Why have you been liking all our photos and commenting? And suddenly it's this whole thing. I'm like, whoa. What? He wouldn't do that, right? What are we talking about here? And he's like, well, look at this. And his ex-girlfriend had been was posting some thirst trap photos. She was at the beach showing off her ass and whatever, good for her. But my friend that same day had not just liked the post, but commented on that post with the hard eyes. And he was never friends with this girl. He only knew of her through him. And so anyway, this whole fight happened. And I don't think they ever made up as friends. Anyway, not a red flag. So next on the list, this is actually a red flag for me. And that is Twilight. And I would say in general, men, you can like Twilight, but it's the man who is trying to show off that he is a puppy to get laid, trying to signal and who's desperate. That's what I feel like when guys are into books that are generally or highly read by females. And it's okay. I read, I think, the first Twilight book and saw the movies because my sister was into it and I was young and everybody was into it. And so I just got drugged to the movies and saw them, whatever. And I could sit and have a conversation about Twilight. But there is actually a power imbalance and a difference most of the time between men and women and how they act. If there is a woman and she's acting like she's super into something that's super masculine, like some of the masculine books we're talking about, or football or whatever, I don't ever really view that as creepy. Because if she's doing it from what I can tell in a genuine way, I'm like, oh, okay, she just likes that. Good for her. But it comes back to the bar analogy, that if a man walks into a bar tonight and he says, hey, who wants to come back to my house and have sex with me? And he's talking to all these ladies, no one is going to say yes. They're going to be like, what the hell? But if a woman walks into a bar tonight and says, who wants to have sex with me? Most of the men in there are going to say, yeah, let's go. And so the man that is acting desperate and is into Twilight or into these things, and you're like, are you really into that? Or is it just a way to get attention, to kind of find this mutual rapport so then that you can, date them or go wherever, when a real relationship and rapport should just be built off of personality and other stuff. And that's what I should say also about all these books. You should never try to build a relationship on the back of books. It's an absolute disaster. If there is a woman out there and she is beautiful and she loves Infinite Jest and all the other books that you like, or a man likes all the stuff that you're into, that does not mean at all that they are a good match for you. You should maybe even be more careful if that's the case, because you might get sucked in and think because they're like you in all the same ways, but they're not. So this is one I've heard talked about a lot, which is Chuck Palahniuk's Fight Club. And Palahniuk is a decent writer, and a lot of men obviously got excited about this movie because of Pitt and Norton, and it made a big splash just kind of in the cultural element in the mid to early 2000s. But I feel like this is just more of a difference in interest thing than a red flag thing, because men are just statistically much more into boxing and MMA and even like libertarian slash anarchist politics. And that's what this book slash movie is about. So you combine them together, you add some trippy mind stuff to it, and it's suddenly a classic. Like, I showed this movie to my wife like 2 years ago, and she's read Infinite Jest, Blood Meridian, I would say very well versed. And she was just kind of like, and loves film. And she was just kind of like, meh, like, that was okay. That was pretty interesting, kind of good. But I was like, what? Kind of good? You didn't love this? But I don't know many guys who aren't into Fight Club. And so if we just kind of want to go with all men are red flags, then I guess that works with this, but I wouldn't throw Fight Club into a red flag category. Next, we have The Secret, and I could throw any new age spirituality in here because guess what? I consider myself a pagan. I'm very much into spirituality. I've been doing yoga and meditating for 17 years, teaching yoga for I think 13 years now. Like, I am not someone who's like, ha, ha, ha. But, a lot of base level manifestation type of spirituality is a red flag for me personally, and I think should be for everybody, because most of the time it's focusing on their own enlightenment. I call it the My Enlightenment movement. And this is very similar to the My Freedom movement. Like, a lot of libertarians and anarchists, they don't care about the general collective society being better off. They just care about their own freedom. Like, they don't want to have to pay as many taxes or have the government control them in this or that way, but they don't care really about the world. And I would say that a lot of people who I've known, and I've known thousands in the spiritual movement, the yoga movement, they just care about their own enlightenment. They care about feeling good and achieving whatever, but they don't really care about raising the global collective society's consciousness. And I would say The Secret is like one of the more problematic books for like in that category that those type of people are drawn to, because manifestation in general doesn't matter if you are content, if your life is okay. And the last book on our list is The Stranger by Albert Camus. And I would say that this could be a red flag book because a lot of people who make the transition away from Christianity in an intellectual manner fall upon The Stranger by Camus because it's easy to read, it's short, and really gets to the heart of existentialism. And people on this channel all the time say, you don't understand existentialism. It's not that. Camus never called himself an existentialist. Like, oh my God. And there is a difference between what is written and then how it's applied by people in general on the ground. And I've spent time as a red flag existentialist. I've taught in public schools for 7 years now and seen many young men get into Camus and leave a trail of destruction behind them. A couple years ago, one of my students who was into Camus left many broken hearts and ended up getting expelled. And this was like his Bible. And I've known many people in academia, in my personal life. And it's because you're in this very volatile time. You were suddenly kind of on this pursuit of pleasure and starting to question morality and these types of things. And it's almost like also like Jack Kerouac's The Road, which could be seen as a red flag book. I remember, I'll tell both stories. Like when I was 15, I remember I got into existentialism and I would just break up with the girls randomly because I was like, this doesn't matter. You guys don't matter. Like, this is kind of hard. I'm done. And I would think, and I've known many people who are like this. And it's weird seeing kids act like this, today with the very same books. And then when I was 18 with Jack Kerouac's The Road, I was like in a relationship and he was like, I'm done. I'm going to go out and hitchhike and be a free spirit. And that's not bad. Like, I was living, but these aren't markers of someone who you should be dating maybe in a stable relationship. Now, like looking back, like I'm into existentialism. I was just talking about in my book club, existentialism and Albert Camus and the myth of Sisyphus the other day. He's still a GOAT author, but there can be a blending of existentialism, nihilism, and kind of negativity, especially kind of at the start when people start to experiment with this stuff. And I think that's why it was added to the list. Okay, so it doesn't matter what people read. And what was fun about this is that maybe you were triggered by some of the pics in this video. Like, why would they do that? But men do this to women all the time. When you see that someone is into book talk books or something, how do you feel about them? Do you judge them? Is it a red flag? And so what really matters at the end of the day is getting to know someone, really diving deep into their personality and your kind of goals and visions, as a couple in the future, because that's what really matters. And so thank you guys for hanging out with me in this fun video and taking a break from some of the more serious videos. And I will see you guys very soon.